everyone, AI is a big topic these days, but we're going beyond all the hype and looking at something you might not expect. How cities are using it. It's more interesting than it sounds, I promise. Cities are using AI in ways that impact our daily lives and figuring it out as they go along, which is a pretty big deal when you think about it. So how are they balancing innovation with responsibility? What can we learn from what they're trying? To answer these questions, we're going straight to the source official city websites and expert reports. We'll kick things off in Seattle. They're known for their tech scene, but what caught my eye is their responsible artificial intelligence program. They've got a whole webpage about it, and it's clear they're not taking this lightly.
It's really interesting to see how Seattle is trying to define its role in a field that's constantly changing. They're not shying away from how complex AI is, which is clear right from the start.
Yeah, they start with the official U.S. code definition of AI, which I think is smart. It grounds the conversation. It's all about machines making decisions that affect us in the real world. But then they take it a step further and talk about both the good and the bad. Solving problems, better city services, that's the positive side. But they're also upfront about things like misinformation and privacy. They're not pretending there aren't risks. It's refreshing.
And that's where their proactive approach comes in. They're creating principles, policies, even guidelines for city workers. It's not just theory for them. It's about putting it into action.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting things I found is their generative AI policy. I'll admit, I'm still getting my head around generative AI.
Yeah.
It's the kind that makes stuff, right?
Right. It's not just analyzing data. It's using data to create something new. Text, images, even music.
Okay, so it's a whole other level. So how does Seattle's policy handle that?
Well, they took their time with it. They brought in experts, researchers, even their Community Technology Advisory Board. They wanted input from all sides.
It's transparency and collaboration from day one.
Exactly. And the policy itself really focuses on human in the loop. So even though AI can create things, humans are still in charge of reviewing and approving anything that's used publicly or that affects decisions.
There's a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely. And they're also big on making sure that anything created by AI is labeled clearly.
Right.
They don't want people tricked into thinking something was made by a person when it wasn't.
That makes a lot of sense, especially for things like official announcements or documents. So Seattle's got a handle on generative AI, but their responsible AI approach is much broader. They have a whole set of AI principles they're trying to incorporate into everything.
Right. 5 core principles, and they're all connected, not treated separately. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, so what are those principles and how do they shape things in Seattle?
Well, first you've got transparency and accountability. Making sure people understand how and why AI is being used by the city is crucial for trust.
Definitely. No one wants to feel like things are happening in secret.
Exactly. Then there's effectiveness, making sure AI systems actually work, that they're not just there for the sake of being flashy new tech.
They need to actually benefit the people of Seattle.
Exactly. Then there's equity and access, meaning AI should be used to make things fair for everyone. This is huge, because if we're not careful, AI could actually make existing inequalities worse.
And it seems like Seattle's trying to address that head-on by including these concerns in their policies right from the start.
Right. They're also thinking about privacy and security. AI has the potential to collect so much data. They want to make sure people's privacy is protected throughout the process.
Which is key because the last thing anyone wants is to feel like their every move is being tracked and analyzed.
Exactly. And lastly, there's sustainability and long-term thinking. This means looking at the environmental impact of AI and ensuring these systems benefit future generations too.
So it's not just about today's problems, it's about making sure AI doesn't create bigger problems down the road.
Exactly. And that's what's great about Seattle's approach. They're not just thinking short-term, they're considering the long-term effects of AI and how it'll shape the city's future.
So they have the principles, but how are they actually putting these into practice? What does this look like on the ground?
Well, take how they're handling data. They're using something called differential privacy. It's complicated, but it lets them analyze data and get insights without compromising anyone's individual privacy.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty big deal, especially now with so much data being collected everywhere.
It is, and it's just one way Seattle is backing up its commitment to responsible AI. They're not just talking, they're taking real steps to reduce risk and make sure ethical considerations are part of the process from the beginning.
That's impressive. I imagine that's not easy to do, especially for a city government that has so many other priorities.
It's definitely not. But it shows how much they care about getting this right. They see AI as potentially transformative, but also recognize that it demands caution and a sense of responsibility.
Absolutely. And they're not alone in this, right? Other cities are dealing with these same questions and challenges.
Absolutely. And in a way, they're all learning from each other, sharing what works and what doesn't.
It's like a collaborative effort,
Exactly.
which is what we'll look at as we move to our next city. So we've seen how Seattle's approaching this, but they're not alone in tackling this new frontier, right?
No, not at all. We're seeing cities all over the country realizing they need to be proactive about AI, shaping how it's used in their communities.
I bet that's a challenge. AI moves so fast. How do you even start creating guidelines and policies that can keep up?
It's a huge challenge for sure. One interesting thing is that there's a lot of sharing going on. Cities are looking at what others are doing, sharing best practices, and learning from each other.
Kind of like a collaborative network for AI in government.
Exactly. And it's not just at the city level either. National organizations like the National League of Cities, the NLC, are stepping in, offering guidance and support.
That's the group that acts as a central hub for cities across the U.S., right?
That's right. They provide resources, research, best practices, all sorts of things local governments need. And AI has been a big focus for them lately. Which makes sense, given how fast it's all changing.
So what sort of guidance is the NLC providing on AI specifically?
One of their main messages is that cities need to take charge. They're encouraging local governments to be proactive. Don't wait for state or federal regulations to dictate how to use AI.
That's interesting. You often hear about how cities are playing catch-up when it comes to tech.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But here, cities have a chance to lead. They're closer to the people actually using these technologies. So they're in a unique position to understand the potential benefits and risks.
That makes sense. So being proactive, taking ownership. What else is the NLC recommending?
They're really pushing for what they call AI literacy among city staff, making sure the people making decisions about AI understand how it works, its limitations, its potential impact, all of that.
So not just having a tech team that gets it, but making sure everyone from the mayor's office to public works has at least a basic understanding.
Exactly. Because AI is going to touch so many different parts of city government. You need everyone to be aware of the issues, able to ask the right questions.
That's a great point. Are there any specific cities that the NLC holds up as examples? You know, cities doing interesting things with AI.
They often point to San Francisco. They're doing some really interesting things.
Article.
Well, like Seattle, they've developed their own set of guidelines for using AI in city government.
Are they similar to Seattle's?
They are, in that they emphasize responsible use, transparency, accountability, all those important things. But San Francisco's taken a slightly different approach in how they've structured their guidelines. They've created what they call a risk management framework for AI.
Okay, risk management framework. Tell me more about that.
Basically, it's a system for identifying, assessing, and mitigating the potential risks of using AI for all sorts of city operations.
So like a structured way of thinking through what could go wrong and then figuring out how to minimize those risks?
Exactly. And what's interesting is they've identified specific risk levels for different use cases. So an AI system used to go through job applications might be considered higher risk than one used to optimize traffic flow, for example.
Because the potential for bias or errors is much more significant in that scenario.
Exactly. So the level of scrutiny, the oversight, it all gets adjusted accordingly.
That's a really smart approach. So they're not saying don't use AI for anything high risk. It's more like, if you are, here's how to do it responsibly.
Right, exactly. It's about understanding the nuances and being smart about risk management.
Makes sense. So that's the potential downside. But what about the positives? How is San Francisco using AI to actually improve city services?
One area where they've had some success is in their 311 system, using AI to make it more efficient.
That's the system people use to report non-emergency issues, right? Potholes, graffiti, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And San Francisco gets a ton of those calls, so they've started using AI to help route those calls more efficiently, even predict what kinds of issues might come up in certain neighborhoods based on past data.
So it's out using AI to get a better handle on the data they already have, and then using that to improve how they serve people.
Right. They're also experimenting with AI-powered chatbots to answer common questions. That frees up human operators to deal with the more complicated stuff. And they're exploring how AI could make traffic flow better, public transportation more efficient, all sorts of things.
Wow, it sounds like San Francisco is really trying to use AI across the board.
They are. They even created a whole office in their city government just to oversee AI strategy.
Really? A whole office just for AI? They're serious.
It shows how seriously they're taking it. They see the potential of AI to really improve city government, but they also want to make sure it's used responsibly and ethically.
That makes me wonder, is there a tension there? Can you really be both innovative and cautious with something as powerful as AI? Or do you have to choose one or the other?
That's a great question. And it's one that cities all over are grappling with right now.
Definitely something to think about, and something we'll keep exploring. But before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Cities sharing best practices, learning from each other.
Right, it's crucial.
Because no one city has all the answers yet.
Exactly. Everyone's figuring this out as they go.
Yeah.
And the NLC is doing really important work in facilitating that exchange of knowledge.
So what are some of the key takeaways from the NLC? What do they think is most important for cities to keep in mind as they navigate AI? So we've talked about Seattle's detailed approach and San Francisco's focus on risk management. But what are some of the big picture things the NLC emphasizes? For any city, no matter how big or small, or where they are in their AI journey.
One thing they really stress is that AI isn't just about technology, it's about governance.
What do you mean by that?
They're saying cities need to think about AI the same way they think about any other tool they use to govern, like infrastructure or public safety.
So it's not just about having the latest AI systems, but making sure they're used responsibly.
Exactly. The NLC says cities need to make AI part of their existing governance structures.
Right, so it's not off in its own little world.
Right. Exactly. It needs to be integrated into how the city makes decisions, how it ensures transparency and accountability.
That makes sense. So how does that work in practice? What can cities actually do to make sure AI is governed effectively?
Well, one thing the NLC recommends is having a central point of contact for anything AI related within the city government.
So someone or some group responsible for overseeing how AI is used across different departments?
Exactly. It could be a specific AI officer, a task force, even just a point person in an existing department.
Makes sense, so everyone's on the same page.
Right. The NLC also recommends being very open with the public.
Because ultimately, they're the ones most affected by how this technology is used.
Absolutely. Cities need to be transparent about how they're using AI, what data is being collected, how that data factors into decisions that affect people's lives.
So bring the public along on the journey, not just spring it on them.
Exactly. The NLC even created a whole toolkit for cities that want to have these conversations with their communities.
The toolkit, what's in it?
It's got everything. Templates for public forums, guidance on community surveys, even advice on explaining complex AI stuff in a way that anyone can understand.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
They're trying to cover all the bases, knowing that cities are at different points in their AI journey.
Right. So the NLC is really pushing for responsible and ethical AI, but do they see that as mainly the city's job, or does the private sector have a role to play too?
They definitely see it as a shared responsibility.
Because a lot of these AI technologies are made by private companies, right?
Exactly. The NLC's point is that cities and tech companies need to work together to make sure AI benefits everyone.
What does that look like in reality?
Well, communication is key. Cities need to be able to tell tech companies what they need, what their concerns are, and tech companies need to be ready to listen and adapt.
So it's more of a partnership, less of a vendor-customer relationship.
Exactly. And it also means thinking about ethics right from the start during development.
Building those values right into the tech itself.
Right. The NLC wants cities to use their influence to encourage more responsible AI development.
Using their purchasing power to drive change.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. More and more tech companies are focusing on ethical AI, partly because of this pressure from cities and other customers.
That's good to hear. Sounds like we're seeing a real change in how people think about AI.
I think so. There's a growing understanding that this technology is powerful, but we have to be smart about it.
Absolutely. We can't just get caught up in the excitement of it all. We have to think long term, make sure we're using it in a way that aligns with our values.
Couldn't agree more. That's what makes this such an important conversation. It's not just about the tech, it's about how we shape it to create the future we want.
Well said. And as AI keeps evolving, these conversations are only going to get more important. So if our listeners want to learn more, where can they go?
The NLC website's a great place to start. They have a whole section on AI and local government with articles, reports, all sorts of things. And of course, the cities we discussed have information on their own websites too.
Perfect. We'll link to all of that in our show notes. So as we wrap up this deep dive into how cities are navigating AI, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
I hope they come away understanding both the challenges and the opportunities AI presents for cities. It's complicated, no easy answers. But with careful thought, proactiveness, and collaboration, cities can use AI to make their communities better, more equitable, and more livable for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a future we're excited to follow, and we appreciate you joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.